Hi, in this video we'll cover how to create to-do list app using pure or vanilla JavaScript. We'll walk through step by step how to create and manipulate DOM elements using JavaScript, as well as how to add and remove items from a list using event listeners. And we'll cover two different approaches, simple and the advanced one. I highly recommend to train both until you really comprehend them. Try to write solutions from scratch. This is very important. Start from the easy one and don't forget to design your app first before coding. Use diagrams or notes for that, but don't start coding before you visualize main concepts and flows of your app. So let's start. For such a simple project, it's actually enough to have general requirements and some flows. So in requirements, we have this one that users should be able to add, remove, or complete to-do. And what are our flows? I think for beginners, flows are more important because here you understand actually the actions. And these flows in future will help you understand the problems and will help you to fix the main bugs in your application, because here this is the overview of all your actions, like map to follow. So here, for example, you write something in input, click button like add button, and it triggers event of adding to do. Next flow is click to do, and it should lead to completion of to do. And remove button click, which this button should be placed near to each to-do item. This should lead to removing to-do. And I think that's it for our current task. This is for the first simple solution. So let's dive into coding. I will create a directory called to-do list. Actually, I will upload this repository to the GitHub, and you can find any project related to beginners section. So this project will be called to-do list. And here let's create index.html file with some basic layout of HTML. By the way, you can type exclamation mark plus tab and you will have the basic structure. Here we should have our script, and let's create something like main.js and main.css. Now let's add these files here. Main.css in the head, and in script tag we will have our main.js file, something like this. I will use in WebStorm, I use a shortcut for reformatting my code. It's very useful. For example, if I do something like this and press Command Alt L, it will be reformatted. I highly recommend you to reformat all your code to have it clean and readable. And if you use VS Code, I don't remember exactly the keystroke for VS Code, but try to find it. What we do now, actually let's think what we should have. Let's see again our requirements. So we have user should be able add, remove, complete to do, okay, and we have our flows. For example, let's try to start from first flow, write to do in input. Okay, so to write something we should have input tag, and let's create input tag in our HTML. The next thing we should have is button. So we have input, we have button, and we should have some action which will be performed after we click the button. But how we access all these things? Through JavaScript. So you can write selectors by tags or selectors by classes. For example, I can use here something like class input, And in JavaScript, we should create constants for our elements from HTML. For example, we should have input element. I have here completion from GitHub Copilot. You can try this extension also, but I recommend for beginners, don't use such extensions. Try to write everything by your hand. So we use document get element by, here not actually get element by. We will use query selector and put selector here. If I write input, this input element will be queried by tag of input. So it will actually take exactly our input. If we have, for example, if we have here two inputs, this query selector will take on the first one. And also we have query selector all, and here we will have array-like structure with all the inputs in our document. But we want our input because it's the only one in the in our HTML. And again, if you want to query it by class, you just type here dot, and it will find a class equals to input. And if, for example, you want to use ID, you write here the hashtag. It's like CSS selectors, but you pass it into JavaScript. Okay, let's actually query it by tag, because we have unique tags here for input and button. So we have input element and we have button element. Here we query it by button tag. Okay, so now let's see again our flow. Write to do in input, click button, add to do. Okay, let's actually open this in our Google Chrome. So we have input and we have button. But when we write something and click, nothing happens because we should write it in JavaScript. So here, everything should be performed on click. Because of this, I add event listener click to my button element actually. And what I should do here, first I want to create element which will be our container for the to-do item. And again, my Copilot suggests me this construction, div document create element div. That's correct. So we create element and we provide tag for this element. Currently we want to create our div element. And what we do next, this is actually up to you how you fill data inside this div. You can do something like inner HTML, or you can append different elements inside this div, but I think it's more convenient to do something like this. Inner HTML, here we can use template literals to actually write different HTML constructions. For example, I want to add span and I want to put here the input element text, because we want to use the text from input element inside our to-do item. So this should be div element inner HTML. Now we fill HTML in our new custom div element with our current input element text, but sorry, not text, value, because this is a DOM element and value, it's a property which contains current value of input. And also I want to add here button tag to remove this to-do item. What I should do next? So let's try again to see our requirements, actually our flows. Write to do in input. Okay, click button. Yes, we have here add to do. So how we exactly adding to do to our HTML? We already have div element with text content from our input and with some button. So what we do next? We want actually right here add event listener to this button, because this exact place contains the context for this button. We can actually write selector to this button right here, and do something on click. So we write query selector button inside this div element, and we do write click listener. And when we want to write here, we actually want to remove this div element. This remove method exists on the div element because it's DOM element, and this method will remove it from HTML. We haven't added this div element to the HTML yet, but we can add event listener already because it will be executed after. This code won't be executed right now, only when you click. And we know that if you can click it, it's already inside HTML. So now we actually can append our element to the HTML. So we write document body append child div element. And again, I'm performing reformatting my code. Okay, sometimes it has semicolons, sometimes it's not. I'm not sure why, but let's try again. Yeah, it's reformatting. So we have here basic construction, really basic. Let's try to check how it works in the HTML. Okay, seems like it's working. Great. One more thing. Let's actually see what about our flows. We performed here first flow, right? To do an input, click button, add to do we have here. Also, we already removed our to do by clicking the button. And the last thing is complete to do. And okay, let's try to think about it. So when we click on text, so we have actually span tag for this text, we can write selector to span and also can write click. And what we can do here, we actually can grab our div element and toggle some class. For example, complete. And this class will have from our main CSS, for example, every item with complete class will have text decoration line through. Okay, let's try to see what happens. It works. So really simple solution. We just add and remove class. This toggle means that if this item already has the complete class, it will be removed. If he does not have this class, it will be added. So this is our first really easy solution for to-do list. In the next solution, we'll try to understand the problems of this solution and we'll try to implement more complex logic for to-do list. I forgot in simple solution to increase the size of my fonts in WebStorm. Sorry for that. So currently in advanced section, I will do that. So what about our advanced solution? Let's try to write our requirements again. So that was requirements for simple solution. Now let's try to think what we add here. Actually, you know, I think I will just add new requirements for this one, because in advanced solution we also should have the requirements from simple one. So what I want to add here, I want to add tabs. So user should be able to switch between tabs. And what tabs we will have? All, undone, done, and I think that's it. So we will have 3 buttons, all, undone, and done. And when we click on each button, we see particular items related to this tab. So in flows, we should write something like click tab filter to-do items, show them in our HTML. Something like this. Now let's try to implement this. So let's add first our tabs. Yeah, I think undone should be before. Something like this. Now let's try to think how we actually will perform our logic in JavaScript. So we want to listen clicks on our tabs. Because of this, we'll first write actually selector to our tabs. So we'll have tabs element document query selector, and here we have a div. Let's call it class tabs and query by this class tabs. We have our tabs element, and now we can actually tabs element dot query selector, because we want to listen actually all our buttons inside our tabs. Because of this, we do tabs element query selector all button, and because it's a list, it's actually array-like structure, we will do for each, and we'll go through every item, and we have our tab. Actually, I will call it tab button, and in tab button we want to actually listen for our clicks. So we perform here our add event listener click and our callback. So what we want to see here, first I will write logic about styling of tabs, because for writing logic about to-do list items, we should restructure our code. So currently I just want to start from styling. So here we go through all the buttons, and each button should have event listener, and this event listener click should remove all the actually classes from each button. So we should again go through our items. Something like this. And do something like this, because we want to remove all the classes from each element inside tabs, each button element. And now we can add our active button inside, of course, the click listener. So let's try to check. Okay, now we have our tabs working, but visually, only visually. And let's try actually to find the problem right here. We have query selector all button, and again query selector all button. That's not a good practice. If you have something duplicated like this, it's better to keep all the buttons in the variable. For example, something like this, and here we can go through tab buttons, and we can go through tab buttons again, something like this. Okay, so we have our solution working visually. Now let's try to think how to write actual logic for to-do items. So let's imagine we want to perform actions like here. For example, if we do call tab buttons done, we should show just done items, and we could write classes for each item like done, undone, and also we should actually check here whether we have line through styles on the element in the filter by this attribute. But let's imagine we did so, and after that we again clicked on all, and we don't know about our previous state. We don't know what previous items we had. So here everything is about describing the global state of your application. This concept is very important in front-end development because all the front-end development is about your data flows. So right here, we should restructure our code, and we should keep actually all our items in global array. And every render, by render I mean show our data state in the HTML. If we have, for example, filtered array with only done items, we should show these items in HTML. So how we do so? To do so, we should create actually our data. Let's call it maybe ToDo items, and we start from an empty array. And in button element click, we won't add directly to the HTML our items. We actually will fill our ToDo items, and then we do call our special action render, which will be also called on removing, and which will be also called on tab buttons click. So let's try to implement this and understand this. For example, we want to think in JavaScript, not in HTML terms. We try to first describe our state in pure JavaScript, and then like different action will represent this data as HTML. So first I will create ToDo item with the value from my input element dot value, like this. And then I will push this ToDo item to our ToDo items. And that's it. Now let's try to think about our special action. So we'll call it render. This action will be called every time we want to sync our data with HTML representation. So we put our code about creating elements and putting it into HTML in this render function. But now we want to go through our global state. So we'll write something like ToDo items for each ToDo item. Here we cut it from here. We create div element as we did previously in the button click. And here we actually want to add here ToDo item value. I think it's better to understand the concept of state and what we should keep in our global state. I keep the ToDo items like let because I will reassign these ToDo items after filtering, for example in tabs, because I think it's more readable to use filter method and reassign rather than use something like splice or etc. And also we need to have something like current tab, because we do want to understand what is current filtering state. For example, if we change or delete something, we should know what we render. And also in render method, we need to understand what actually what items to render accordingly to this current tab. So maybe it's better to call it current tab. And in render, we should create our filter ToDo items, and here we will have some logic. Pilot actually suggests me great logic. So if current tab is all, we returns true. If we have current tab equals to done, we return all the items with done property true. And we actually didn't add our done property, because we need to rely on some property to understand how to filter our items. And if we have undone, we do something like this, not to do item dot done. And now we can go through these items and render them as we did previously. And now it's time to think about how to remove our items. Actually, not only remove, but change the data. And we cannot use indexes or values of current item, because values can be the same and indexes can be different if you have different tab selected, because you have different length of array. So we will use unique ID, and usually you receive this from database, but we will use something like date now. In our case, it's okay. And when we remove something, we just reassign our ToDo items, and we just see that if we find the ID which is the same like ToDo item ID, we just do not include it in our new items. It's important that filter gives us new array, so we reassign our previous array, and we do render again. Sorry, this code here, because I changed it a lot, so it should be query selector span, click, and actually we should map through all our items. So what we want to do, if we know that we found our item, we want to toggle our done property, something like this. And after that we do render again. So after we do so, also don't forget to render on click of adding. Now let's try to test it. And you see we have problem, and I suggest you pause the video, try to understand what is the problem. So problem is that every time we render, we actually do not clean up our HTML. I created ToDo items div, and I just want to put every item on this div and just remove every item before every render. So when I do append, I just will query selector ToDo items, append child, and before the loop I will reset the inner HTML. You also could do something like give to each item the class like ToDo item and go through all of these classes and remove all of them, but I think it's more comprehensive solution. So now let's try to see. We have our removing, but we do not have our completing. So let's try to see what's the problem is here. Of course, the problem is that we actually remove the logic of adding class, special class for div if we have done property true. So what we do here in our render, we should actually see whether ToDo item done. Copilot suggests me, and if we have ToDo item done, we do div element class list add. Actually here we have complete, and if we do not have it, we do remove, and here also complete. Let's try to test it again. Okay, we have here incorrect behavior, because if we have done, because I added in the initial item, I added done true, but it should be done false. Okay, now we have our logic working. And the last thing would be actually filtering on tabs. And here we should add the logic. Whether we have our tab button not like this, but actually we can check our inner text, for example, like this, because we know that if we have our tab button all, what we do, we set our global variable like current tab equals to all, and we just do render. And also we can do it for done and for undone. I did this like this before. I want you again to stop the video, try to understand how to improve this code. Yeah, of course, don't forget to put all these things inside our click handler. So let's try to see. We have all, undone, done. When we click, it goes to done. When we click here, it goes to undone. And all would always contain all the things. And it seems working. And the solution for this was just to actually write this one to our current tab and do render, something like this. And it also should work perfectly. So let's try. Undone, done. Okay, seems working. So that wasn't easy. This solution about complex logic wasn't easy, and I really recommend you to try to implement all of this from scratch to understand why we keep the data outside and how we perform this logic. So you need to try again by yourself to construct the logic for this type of application. I hope that was helpful.